welcome to Overdrive. I am Soini Datta. Before Mahindra launches its electric vehicles based on the Inglo architecture, Mahindra has to cover its bases against the Tata Nexon EV and the MG ZS EV, and that is where Mahindra's new electric XUV400 comes into play. Here's Tuhin getting you all the details.
Now we already know what Mahindra's big EV push will look like with the concepts based on the Inglo architecture. But the first of those EV SUVs is still 2 years away. So in the meantime, we have this, the Mahindra XUV400, which as the name suggests is the electrified version of the XUV300, and will take on the likes of the Nexon EV Max and the ZS EV. As you can see from the copper highlights, that it's part of the XUV family of Mahindra SUV. So you have this copper Twin Peaks logo and these X motifs throughout the frontal fascia of the car. Of course, there's no grille anymore. And this has become a bit more angular. And again, those copper highlights, they are a recurring theme throughout the car. Now, the headlamp cluster is the same as in the XUV300, but you see that there are no front fog lamps anymore. Now, coming to the side, you notice a different design for the alloy wheels, although the tires are the same size as before. And again, you have a really bright sort of vibrant shade of color, like these grays and these blues and blacks. And they all seem to work quite well with these copper highlights. And another big change, the XUV400 is not exactly the same dimensions as the XUV300. It's 200 mm longer, as you can see from this section. So the slightly ungainly rear that the XUV300 was quite criticized of is gone now. It's a much more proportionate look now, especially when you view it from this angle. The tail lamp cluster has changed. Now you have these clear lens elements, although the basic design remains the same. And again, those cross copper motifs that you saw in the front, they're repeated in the tail lamps as well. The boot itself is much larger now. That was another sort of complaint with the XUV300, that the boot wasn't quite as large, but as you can see, it's large. Now, this is something you don't see very often, but from converting the XUV300 to the XUV400, Mahindra has also changed the location of what would have been the fuel filler cap to here, the charging port here, which means that when you are at a charging station, you don't have to back up and it's a lot of hassle. You don't have to do that. You can just drive right in and charge through here, which is a nice touch. Now the XUV400 is powered by a 39.4 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack. It's IP67 rated, which means you have some level of dust and water protection. As for charging the XUV400, you have three options as usual. You can use a DC fast charger, which will charge the battery to up to 80% in half an hour. Or you can put up an AC wall box at your home, which charges it in a relatively quick 6.5 hours. Or of course, if you're stranded somewhere, you don't have access to any of those, you can still charge it from a 3-pin socket, which is a good option to have, but that'll still take you about 13 hours. Now, as for the interiors of the XUV400, they're pretty much a straight lift from what you get in the XUV300, but of course there are some changes. To start with, you have this all black shade, which looks nicer, at least in our books, than the sort of plain beige and black that you have in the combustion engine version. But some of the things that we don't like is these switches, which we think should have been changed to something a bit more modern. And similarly, you've lost some features. For example, you don't get dual zone climate control anymore. You don't get the steering modes anymore. But that said, the XUV400 is still reasonably well equipped. You get auto headlamps, you get 7-inch touchscreen, you get height adjustable seats, a sunroof. But aside from that, the XUV300 is one of the larger cars in this segment, and that continues unchanged even here. So you have a great view out, you have good shoulder room here, comfortable seating, and the windows are large, so that is not a problem at all. Now coming back to the features, we also would have liked maybe a digital instrument cluster, with EVs and the buyers of EVs being so technologically savvy. That could have been an addition. And this touchscreen is an older unit, so maybe that could have been updated. You have the same pretty decent quality of plastics. There aren't too many soft surfaces aside from the common touch points, such as this bit here, this bit here. But you have this nice sort of weave to the steering wheel, this grip. The buttons, maybe they look a bit dull because they are the same color as the rest of the cabin, but they feel and function well enough. But probably the nicest bit of the XUV400's cabin is this new gear shifter. It looks like it's from a much more expensive car. Feels nice to grip. It's got a rubberized feel to it. And as you can see, It functions with a nice click as well, and you can choose pretty much everything from here. Now, if you are a family who's looking for an EV, then the XUV400 should definitely be on your radar, simply because of the amount of space that it offers. It's significantly larger, at least on initial impression, than the Nexon EV. So you have, as you can see, quite a bit of legroom. Headroom is great, especially with the scooped out roof. You have this wide bench, so 3 abreast is not going to be an issue, especially if the third passenger is a child. The floor isn't too high, considering it is an EV. You have a hump, but it's not too high. And again, storage spaces, there's quite a few. You have these cup holders here. You have large bottle holders. It's the same in the front with this large center console and even bigger storage pockets in the front doors. Now, the only thing that we don't like in the back seat is probably the cushioning on the backrest. It's a bit too firm for our liking, but again, it's totally dependent on how you like it. Now, the XUV300 is a 5-star rated car in terms of safety, and I think that should carry over to a large extent in the XUV400. You get 6 airbags, at least in the top variants. You get ABS, you get rear disc brakes. But other than that, it should be a safe structure to begin with.
Welcome back. Here with us on Overdrive. Now, Mahindra's first electric SUV, the XUV400, is based on the XUV300. It packs in a 39.4 kilowatt-hour battery pack, and it also gives you a range of 456 kilometers. What does it feel like to drive on the road, though? Tuhin tells us.
Now, Mahindra says that the XUV400 is the fastest accelerating car that you can buy in the mass market, with a 0 to 100 time of 8.3 seconds. Now, we can't put that claim to test, but Mahindra also says that its top speed is 150 kilometers per hour. We've just done that. In fact, we've seen an Odo indicated 160 at the high-speed bowl at the Mahindra SUV proving grounds that we're at, where we're testing the XUV400. Now, you get 3 drive modes: fun, fast and fearless, and they progressively increase in performance. So in the fun mode, you have speed is limited to about 95 kilometers an hour. Now the acceleration, the throttle response is a bit less brisk, and that progressively increases to 150 kilometers per hour in the fearless mode. And we must say that even in this very steep 40-degree banking, we did find that the XUV400 to be quite stable. Of course, there's not much noise apart from the wind buffeting that you can hear. It's an EV after all. But here at a steady 100, you notice that it's a very quiet place to spend time in. So high speed, long distances will be quite calming in this SUV. So even here, when we're on this quite steep banking, you notice that the car is straight. There's some movement, as you might expect, but again, it's quite stable for a car with a relatively short wheelbase on a high speed bowl such as this one. Now, of course, we are in a controlled environment of this test track, and these XUV400s that we are driving aren't exactly production ready. There's still some software work to be done on it. So from what we've seen so far, the 400 seems like it'll be a competent city car, pretty much like most EVs are. So in the fun mode, you have a decent amount of performance. It's perfectly enough for you to get around your daily maybe commute. And then when you want a bit more power, the fast mode too is helpful. Although we would have liked maybe the throttle response to be a bit less sharp as you progress through the modes. But other than that, it's a perfectly usable car in both those modes. It's got that steady sort of typical EV torque that you like so much. And yeah, so that pretty much makes it a very usable car in the city. And in terms of how it rides and handles, again, it's typically like an EV. You have that slightly stiff feeling through the suspension, say over expansion joints or over potholes and manhole covers. But apart from that, say on a smooth road such as this one, it stays flat, it stays level, it stays well poised. So in that way, it is quite confidence inspiring. Now, some of the things that we would have liked to have been better, and these have sort of carried over from the XUV300, is the feel from the steering. There isn't too much feedback, it's quite light. So say when you're on a long corner such as this one, you are sometimes second guessing what the car is doing. But you have a good view out, like you have in the XUV300. You can see the edges of the bonnet, so moving around in the city is not going to be an issue. And similarly, the braking. Now, as you progress through the modes, you get varying degrees of regen, which we can't show you because the regen sort of gauge isn't exactly tuned as, and we can't even tell you what the range sort of figure is like in the real world. Although we think about a 300 kilometer range in the real world, 300 350 is achievable. But what we would have liked with the regen is that the transition between the braking and the regen could have been a bit smoother. The throttle pedal feels a bit sharp when you apply it, when you're switching over from regen to the physical brake. So coming to a complete halt easily is not very easy. But apart from that, the regen itself seems quite strong, and you have this L mode, which is quite useful. It's typically what B mode would be in many of these EVs and hybrids, and as you can see, we're coming to a complete halt. It can do that, and you don't have paddles to control the regen, which makes this L mode extremely useful in the city. So you can pretty much one pedal drive in the city, just control your speed and deceleration through the accelerator, which will make it even more easy and even more efficient to drive in the city. Now, to go back to the way the XUV400 handles, there is good news here. Now, we didn't like the steering, but the body movements, they are quite confidence inspiring. As you can see, the car, there's not too much body roll, mainly thanks to all the weight being below you. And the car stays true to its line. So, like the recent spate of Mahindra's, the XUV400 is again quite a nice car to drive. Now, the XUV400 only goes on sale by January of 2023. But given a choice, would you pick one? See, we can't tell you exactly how efficient it is, but with over 450 kilometers of range, even on the AREA cycle, there is reasonable, usable real-world range to be had from the car, we think at least. And we would have liked a few more features, maybe at par with what you get in the XUV300. But aside from that, the car is spacious, it's comfortable, it's nice to drive, and you have all the benefits that you look for in an EV in the XUV400. So we think generally this should be another successful product from Mahindra.
Welcome back, you're watching Overdrive. Now, it's the Bengaluru-based startup's first electric motorcycle, the Oben Rorr, a hunter or the hunted in this free-for-all segment. It's time to find out.
I think electric two-wheelers in a country like India, well, currently you only have a flurry of electric scooters to deal with and not a lot of electric motorcycles. Well, you do have a couple of options in the form of the Revolt motors, a couple of motorcycles out there. You have the Torque motors, Kratos. Well, that is still not a finished product up until this time. And now we have another proposition in the form of the Oben Rorr.
Looking at the Rorr head-on, or even if you see it in your rear-view mirrors, you won't really be able to tell that this one's an electric, because unlike most other electrics, this one doesn't look spindly and narrow up front, but like a regular old ICE motorcycle with its chunky telescopic fork and front wheel. The LED ring around the headlamp does look cool, but a little too Honda wannabe for me.
So coming up to the display, well, you have a 7-inch reverse LCD unit, which gives you just the basic amount of information, not a great deal to toggle with, honestly. It's a little hard to decipher out there riding in the sun, but yes, well, you do have connectivity via an app. You can connect to the motorcycle via an app, and you get a lot of more additional information via that app rather than on the motorcycle itself. Well, the tank on this particular motorcycle houses the cable that you can use to charge the motorcycle. And the best part about it, or the unique and even more unique part about it, it is a 3-pin plug that you can extend out of the motorcycle and plug into any 3-pin wall-mounted socket. Moving further back, you have a rather narrow seat, and the tail end, well, it's rather simplistic, but of course, it being an electric vehicle, not an ICE engine, you have no exhaust unit or end can or anything like that, so it's pretty open and very airy looking at the back. Now coming to the ride and handling, once you actually swing a leg over the motorcycle, the Oben Rorr, well, oh yeah, that might take a little bit more of an effort than you usually would. This is a tall motorcycle and it has around 200 mm of ground clearance. So it's pretty tall and it seems very appropriate for Indian road scenarios. The riding position, quite comfortable. It's a bit on the sportier side. Your knees, your legs will be placed so, and it feels a tad sporty and nice. Flat handlebars, well within reach, everything where you want it to be. My only qualm with this particular setup is the tank, which basically the shape of the tank, well, it sort of intrudes, it sort of juts into your inner thigh when you really want to ride fast. And yes, the more you ride the motorcycle, well, it is going to be a little more painful to deal with. But the company says that it is going to address certain problems like this from feedback from its customers and people like me. So let's see how it goes. The seat on the narrower side could be better in my opinion, and for the pillion, well, it gets even a lot more narrower. So I'm not too sure if that will really be supremely comfortable for a pillion rider over a relatively long distance.
Out on the road, the Rorr feels nicely balanced with a slightly aggressive riding stance and neutral handling. The suspension is a bit on the stiffer side, and the electric could in fact be compared to a sporty 150 to 160cc ICE motorcycle.
One of its main USPs has to be that big 4.4 kilowatt hour battery that you see right there. It's a lithium iron phosphate unit, not the regular lithium ion unit that most other EVs currently come prepped with. Now, what makes this proposition so unique? Well, first of all, it offers you a good 150 kilometers of range, of course in eco mode, the most economical mode of the bike. And I'll just explain what makes this battery so unique.
Compared to regular lithium-ion batteries, lithium iron phosphate or LFP batteries are cheaper to construct. And since they are nickel and cobalt free, these units do not create their own oxygen in its energy creating chemical process, which often spells disaster in the event of a thermal runaway. Also, these units can withstand a higher temperature before going into thermal runaway, so technically they are a lot safer. Now, the biggest disadvantage of these battery packs is that they are lower in energy density in comparison to lithium-ion battery packs, meaning it's less efficient and it has a shorter range for electric vehicles in comparison. So to address that particular issue, we have a large 4.4 kilowatt hour battery in the Rorr. And the best part is the company claimed that the battery will take just 2 hours to complete charge, which sounds brilliant.
So when talking about performance, yes, well, that's a big standout feature about the Oben Rorr. It's one of the highlights. So you have 3 ride modes to contend with primarily. So first of which being Eco, you have City and Havoc. Eco, of course, being the most economical mode, which gives you the best range capability of this vehicle, and Havoc being the most fun, you could say, where you have a limitation, where you are limited to a top speed of 100 kmph.
Now, the Rorr might be an electric mute with no real exhaust note, but this thing really takes off in Havoc mode. I think that its 10 kilowatt motor could even put some proper small capacity performance bikes to shame with this level of performance, which sounds like heaps of fun, and it is. In Havoc mode, the throttle definitely feels most rewarding. But what doesn't feel so much so is the calibration of the throttle and brakes on this motorcycle, which were definitely off this time around. Yes, now it being an electric, there's no clutch lever on this bike, but the brake levers on either end of the bar felt really hard to employ, which took a bit of effort. But the brakes themselves function very well.
In a state like Maharashtra, this motorcycle will set you back by a good 1 lakh rupees at showroom. That's inclusive of state subsidies. And the further down south you go, like in a state like Telangana, this motorcycle will cost you around 1,25,000 rupees. Well, should you be ready to whip out your checkbook and basically sign up for the Oben Rorr? Well, to be honest, at this particular time, you shouldn't. And let me explain why. Now, the biggest issue that I see with this motorcycle at this particular point in time is the fact that the manufacturer still has a lot of niggling issues to iron out before it comes out with the motorcycle later this year. And whether it actually lives up to its word and manages to achieve all of that in this very short span of time is yet to be seen.
Well, with that, it's a wrap on this week's edition of Overdrive. But remember, you can stay in touch with the team through Facebook, Twitter, as well as YouTube. And you can follow our latest updates on Instagram. We'll see you next week. Until then, goodbye. Many thanks for watching. Ride and drive safe.